Lifting up our hearts to heaven, let us imitate the hierarchy of the ages.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Glory be to Jesus Christ.
Glory be forever.
So one thing that stuck out to me in the epistle and the gospel today that I wanted to sort of point out to everybody is the more or less underlying theme that goes through all of it. And that is about baptism and us doing our part. So if we look to the gospel to begin, Christ begins by saying, if your eye is full of darkness, so are you full of darkness. And how great that darkness must be if it is full of you, if it has overcome the light. And we start to establish this as the basis for how we understand how we have to order our life and how things are changed within us. And in the epistle, and this is the main portion that brings us to baptism, we hear St. Paul talk about being justified by faith. And he says, and I quote, that we have access by faith into this grace. And so St. John Chrysostom in his homily on Romans had expanded upon this and said, what grace is this? It is being counted worthy of the knowledge of God, being forced from error, coming to a knowledge of truth, obtaining all the blessings that come through baptism. And so we begin, of course, with that idea of baptism, that all these blessings come from that. And it's incredible to see what he brings up that actually comes from baptism. It's not just God happens. You're dipped in the water and suddenly everything's fine. It is the blessing that comes from it, the very specific ones. And my favorite is how he says, being forced from error. In your baptism, you weren't just made one with God. You were forced out of your error. If you could imagine that we are not able to pull ourselves closer to God, because we never have been. Instead, God came to us. That's why he sent us his only begotten Son. Now, in baptism, the same thing happens. You are forced from error. God literally grabs you and pulls you away from error. And we'll get to this more as towards the end of the sermon, what I want to close with. But we profess in the creed that I believe in one baptism. And this opens the door for us. This is our beginning. This is the way that we start, is that we believe in that one baptism. And if we had to look at our friends in the evangelical groups of Christianity, the differences always begin there, with that idea of baptism. The justification by faith of St. Paul led a lot of them, especially after the Protestant Reform, to believe in what was called sola fides, or faith alone. And I remember talking about this when I was in seminary with a brother priest of mine, Father Michael Foster, and he had been a Baptist for his entire life growing up before he found Orthodox. And he told us about being in the church, and one of the major things that was a part of a Sunday liturgy, or service, whatever you want to call it, was an altar call. And that would literally be if I were up here at the front and I started screaming that if you wanted to commit yourself to Christ, you do it now. You do it now. I'd probably beat the podium a lot more than I do. But you do it now, and you run forward, and you kneel down, and you commit yourself to Christ, and that's it. Literally, the altar is calling you forward. And that's all you need to do. You can come forward, commit yourself to Christ, and then go ahead and continue being just an average person. Not good, not great. You don't have to care about other people. You committed yourself to Christ. And that is what the idea is that by faith alone we are saved. We are justified by our faith alone. And in Orthodoxy, this is where we begin to diverge from that. We have something deeper. And we hear a lot about this in the Epistle of St. James. See, we are justified by our faith. However, we must remember that it is not faith alone. But we have to do our part. And see, St. John Chrysostom talked about this as well in his homily on Romans, that it is massive, the fact that what God does and what we do. It's always two parts. But God just carries most of the weight. We have to show up. We have to do something about it. And St. James says in his epistle, you see then that a man is justified by works and not by faith only. And he continues further on, faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. It's pretty powerful, if you can imagine that. That if you were to look at your own life and think, am I doing the things that actually act out my faith? If the answer is no, You've been called by one of the greatest saints of the church dead. You were dead inside. And this is why we work at proving our faith, by enacting these works, by doing the things that actually carry our small portion of the weight with God. As our world continues to be in different stages of lockdown, we tend to think about how exactly we can enact these works. The major ones we think about are the idea that, one, we can come to church. We can show our commitment by being here. We can show up and pray. Another one is that we can go out and do things for our neighbor, correct? We can go out and give alms. We can work somewhere that helps the disadvantaged. Now, those things are more or less taken from us. It's dangerous for us to go out, but it might not be operated. And while we looked at this idea that we might not have expendable income if, for whatever reason, we've been laid off or our jobs aren't working out well, or we just don't have as many hours so we can't give as much to the church or to anybody, or we can't go out and serve others, we tend to think, well, there's no works for me to do. I can't do something. And the fact is that we have plenty that we can do that a lot of us tend to ignore. We can repair, improve, and build upon our relationships that are around us. Like me, I have to call my family more. I know it. I don't call them nearly as much as I should. Bonnie's a perfect example. She calls her family every day. It's awesome. They're so connected. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. And I know that my mom would be happy if I called her more. It's generally the stereotype. My mom and my grandma would love to hear from me more. So, this is one thing that we can do. We can build upon our relationships. We can strengthen them where they are weak. And if we have a problem with somebody in our family, we can seek that out and take care of it now. We can build a better relationship with those who live in the same household as us. If you have somebody that you're not agreeing with for some reason, or there's something unspoken between somebody, get it out now. Do it. That relationship is given to you by God. Don't squander it by just saying, well, it's always going to be there, it's fine. Now is the chance. This is a work that you can do, that God has shown us, that we love our neighbor as ourselves. And our neighbor literally just means anybody who's not inside of the same body as you. Literally any other human being. We build upon those. In a massive way of showing our faith by our works, we can continue to pray. And I don't just mean go and do our evening prayers because that brings us closer to God. It readies us for the night, or we do morning prayers. Take extra time out of your day specifically to pray for literally anybody but yourself. A lot of our prayers, even in morning and evening, focus upon ourselves. God, forgive me my sins. Prepare me for the night. Forgive us all the things that we have done this day. I thank you for all that you have done for me this day. Whatever it might be. Take 5 minutes to pray for other people. That's why the Metropolitan has been sending out the list of the coronavirus victims and those essential workers who are out there putting their lives in danger, as well as those who have departed already. It is so that we can take the time to pray for other people. We can show our faith by our works by saying, yes, God, I trust that my prayer will be answered, and so I will pray. I will do this. I will offer it up to you. And lastly, one of the things that we can do to show our faith is to read scriptures or some sort of books that enrich us. If you haven't read the Bible, do it. Pick an easy book. The Epistle of St. James, super short, awesome stuff. It's my favorite book of the Bible. There's so much in there. Or, if you really need something else that's not the Bible, talk to me. I have an entire library in my office of books that otherwise go unused until I need to pull them out for one reference, like once a year. Ask me. Do something to enrich yourself. It shows God your commitment by actively pursuing your faith, by wanting to enrich it, by wanting to do something more to strengthen that connection with God. And then lastly, and this is what I wanted to close with, that all of these actions will show our commitment to our faith. And this is where St. Diadonos of Potiki said, before holy baptism, grace encourages the soul toward good from the outside, while Satan lurks in its depths, trying to block all of the intellect's ways of approaching the divine. But from the moment that we are reborn through baptism, the demon is outside, grace is within. Thus, whereas before baptism error ruled the soul, after baptism truth rules it. After your baptism, you now have truth ruling inside you. In the same way that we were told that we are forced from error by St. John Chrysostom, we recognize that something has to replace that. And what replaces it is truth himself, the divine truth, our one God. Now, I hope that all of us, myself included, that we let this grace that is within inside us, that is guiding us, to continue to guide us, to pull us in the direction that we need to be, to strengthen our faith, and to show that faith by good works. And then through this, hopefully all of us will be justified. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Christ is in our midst.
He is and always shall be.